I don't know how long it's been since you guys have paid attention to Ninjago, but for me, I probably dropped off not long after that song irrevocably changed the function of my developing brain. Jump up, kick back, whip around and spin till the weekend whip, yeah. But while discussing what we remembered with my sister, I dropped a modern bombshell on her and mentioned that there were way more than the starting 5 elements. Yeah, to those of you who got upset at the power of green, you'll be even more shocked by there being like a billion more. From a real-world perspective, these other powers were added so that the riders could put the ninjas through a tournament arc, because that's what all the cool kids were doing at the time. Yeah, there really was a Ninjago tournament arc called the Tournament of Sources. I may not be that involved in the Ninjago fandom, but for some reason I don't often hear people discuss their favorite Ninjago arc. Maybe it's just because none of the One Piece fans have found it yet. Regardless, this tournament added a bunch of new elemental masters, including your classics like light, gravity, and nature, but also adding some odd ones such as amber, reflex, and my personal favorite, and the one we'll be discussing today, surface tension? What? Whoa. I know that sounds super lame and sciencey and a real step down from green, but don't click off yet. Anyways, that power is odd, right? I'm not alone in thinking that. Like, that's weird. I don't know which writer came up with that, but they should probably be checked up on. I mean, you have people wielding the power of literal creation, and one guy can affect surface tension. Really taken aback, me and my sister immediately started discussing how that might be the most useless power, well, ever. So I did some research on it, which is what the rest of this video is about. Is controlling surface tension a strong ability? Because my gut instinct is screaming absolutely not, but who knows? Maybe there's just something hidden here, something quite dangerous. The first thing I learned while looking is that Ninjago lore is surprisingly complicated. There's source dragons, something called the Merge, there's Oni, and apparently surface tension gets its power from the source dragon of strength? I mean, we need like a film theorist on this. There's a shocking amount of lore here. The important things I did learn were surface tension was a recent addition in 2023 in Ninjago Dragon Rising, and that this is the thing who wields it. Now, this is where I'd like to make an important distinction. Ninjago is the inspiration for this video. However, I'm just going to be discussing how powerful surface tension control is in a general context, and not in how it's used in the show. So I'm not observing what powers this ninja has for a base or anything like that. Sound good? Good, but a funny thing I did find in this very short Wikipedia page is this quote in the trivia section. It appears to be one of the weakest abilities. That is incredible that they felt the need to write that down. But on the other hand, that's where I say. Weakest? Weakest? They have no idea of what they mock. I will show them all. So this is the single fight surface tension ever fights in the show. And that's how it went. Well, that's technically not true. They show up in this fight too, and bam, there they are for like around 4 frames. What's the opposite of a goat? A woat? The worst of all time? This ninja's incompetence aside, after doing some research, I do genuinely think that this element could be quite powerful. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say that if this power really did exist, they'd be terrifying. Okay, time to get this out of the way first. What is surface tension? I know many of you are thinking, oh, I know what surface tension is, and many of you are also wrong. Of course, there are some of you who actually do know what surface tension is, nerds, but I'm going to ignore you in order to make my point. Of course, being a nerd is very welcome here, as who am I to call someone a nerd as someone who's talking about freaking surface tension on the internet. Back to the point, surface tension is a liquid's ability to resist force. Basically, when you push on the surface of the water, it pushes back. This force is responsible for water droplets, bubbles. Yeah, the Ninjago writers were actually right about that. And the searing pain you feel after you tell your friends that you can totally jump off that high dive. To understand how it works, we have to zoom in. And I mean, zoom in. When looking at the surface, you'll notice that the top molecules don't have molecules above them. Obviously, but this has some implications. You see, water molecules are generally attracted to each other. That's why they stick together as a liquid. This means the molecules at the surface are being attracted equally to the sides, balancing out, but not equally up and down. This results in a net downward force and the molecules getting sucked inward. This puts the top molecules under tension on the surface of the water. Funny how it works out like that. This tension constricts the liquid, giving it the unique water droplet shape. To understand, think of a balloon. The rubber doesn't want to be stretched, so it will constrict inward, thus giving it that balloon shape. But also notice that when trying to poke a balloon, it resists you because it wants to maintain that shape. Well, it's the exact same with water, pushing back to keep its shape. If nothing else, you can just think of surface tension as there being a membrane on top of the water. A little water Ziploc baggie, if you will. Okay, I think I did a pretty solid job there of looking like I'm actually teaching any real science instead of just looking it up on Wikipedia and making basis conclusions from that. Moving on to the fun stuff, how can we use this knowledge to become powerful? So, starting out, according to the Ninjago Wikipedia page, the ability to manipulate surface tension is called superficiokinesis. Is that true? Well, when I looked up that word, the second link that popped up was the Ninjago Wikipedia page I just came from. So we'll just go with it for now. To be fair, I don't think many people have talked about this, so we can make the word whatever we want to be. So I guess we'll just go with this absolutely unpronounceable word. So, you've just acquired this hot new superficiokinesis. What do you do with it? Well, I'm gonna kind of go back on my word here and talk about something that sounds even nerdier than surface tension, but is not, I promise, just listen, capillary action. I mean, it's gotta be cool. It's got action in the name. Capillary action is what happens when you stick a really thin tube in water. The water will go up the tube, no vacuum or any other force required. It just does that. Why does it do that? Well, it's complicated, but just trust that it does do that. I guess you could test it if you don't trust me. If you do test it, well, you got good instincts on you there, kid, because I wouldn't trust me either. However, you should totally trust this equation that I hopefully remember to put on the screen. This equation describes capillary action. On the left is height, how much the water will move up the tube, but you can instead more think of it as how much capillary action is occurring. And then here up top, we've got surface tension, meaning the higher the surface tension of the liquid, the more capillary action will occur. So what? I hear those of you who are still awake saying and haven't just gotten this video on autoplay while asleep. Well, have you ever wondered how trees get water from the roots up to those tall branches? And no, I know at least some of you just assume the tree caught rainwater up there, but that's just not what happens. All the rainwater comes from the roots. But they don't have a heart to pump it up there. Instead, they use capillary action to bring up water. So what were to happen if you were to say, decrease the surface tension? Well, you'd essentially be stopping the plant's heart, killing it about as fast as you could kill anything in this world. With this power, you would be a walking disaster, killing all the crops you could see with this. You are the power to cause mass starvation and mass death, like a living plague. More than that, people also rely on capillary action. It's what cleans the tears out of our eyes. Without it, people would go blind from overflowing tears. Now, what was a weak power again? But let's calm down a bit. Now that I've got your attention, while our boy here is quickly becoming one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, I actually want to discuss a bit of what this power couldn't do, just like how Missile knows where it is based on where it isn't. As we've discussed, well, you didn't say anything, but as I said earlier, surface tension is really an expression of cohesion, which in of itself is a result of atomic bonds. So there is an argument to be made that this power is actually the power to control molecular cohesive forces, which would be entirely physics breaking and would destroy the whole world as we know it. So although that's scientifically accurate, I'm not going to include that, as that seems a bit outside the initial scope for these powers, meaning these powers are this strong even while being kind of artificially nerfed by me. But my next point actually isn't my fault, and actually almost caused me to not make this video at all, and that is buoyancy. You see, I initially thought this would be the easiest video ever. I assumed you could essentially rule the seas with this power, banish any ship you didn't like to the bottom of the seas like some kind of knockoff Davy Jones. You'd be essentially unbeatable in Navy combat and only approachable by air, and that's a great idea. Except for the part where I'm a huge idiot. The thing is, boats actually float because of something called buoyancy force, which is quite different from surface tension. You know how if you pour multiple liquids together that don't mix, they kind of form layers? Well, it's kind of the same idea here. If you are less dense than water, then you float. Or in more technical terms, if you displace or move more water than you weigh, then you will float on top of the water. This doesn't require surface tension at all, and is just density at play. There actually are some things that float due to surface tension, for example, surface striders and paper clips if you're careful. You see, surface tension doesn't scale super well. Surface tension will increase with, well, surface area, but buoyancy increases with volume. So the rule of thumb, if it's the size of a duck or larger, it's buoyancy. If it's less, it's probably surface tension. Interestingly enough, this is a very similar rule to determining if a woman is a witch. Ducks use buoyancy to float, but they use surface tension to keep their feathers from getting soaked and getting very dense. Because if the feathers are too wet, the ducks will be too dense to float. So while you might not be able to use this power to sink boats, you can absolutely destroy a duck though. This is the duck slaying power. However, while you couldn't sink boats, you could do the opposite. Well, by that I don't mean you could unsink a boat, but you could make things that shouldn't float, float. You could essentially make water hard as rock, letting you and anything else stand on top of it. Because while boats would still float if there is zero surface tension, a very large surface tension will make everything float. So yeah, you could jump on bubbles like they did. You saw how that went. But you could also use this to potentially freeze boats in water, preventing them from moving. And if any poor souls were to fall into the water, it would be as if they fell in cement, the crushing surface tension preventing them from moving even an inch. Which is where another devastating fact comes into play. Surface tension goes both ways. Have you ever seen that image of a swimmer right before the surface of the water breaks? Well, with this power, you could ensure that it never does. Against you, underwater is simply another word for death sentence, and every lake is simply an empty, watery tomb waiting to be filled. Pretty scary now, right? But honestly, that's nothing. Just wait until I talk about this next thing. Soap. Well, I'm already aware that soap by itself presents a danger of instant death for gamers like me. That's not what I'm talking about. Have you ever wondered why soap works? I know that's an odd question because obviously that's just how soap works. That's why we use it. But I'm going to go a little bit more into detail. Soap is what's called a surfactant. This means it is composed of tiny soap particles that contain both hydrophobic and hydrophilic parts, which looks like this. What this does is it allows it to bond with both water and other chemicals or air. Most of the time, it kind of forms a layer on top of the water like this. And if you were paying attention, this layer between the water and air is what caused the surface tension. Now, even the top water molecules have something above them balancing out forces. This dramatically reduces surface tension, and that's what surfactants do. For our case, being a surfactant allows water to absorb other things without surface tension getting in the way, making it great for cleaning. As per your daily life advice, lowering surface tension will make things great and easier to clean, which is why when you clean, you should use a detergent, a surfactant, and use hot water, which has a lower surface tension. Neat fact, huh? Okay, but why am I even explaining this? Well, this is where pulmonary surfactants come into play. For those of you who have kept up on your Latin, you already know where this is going. For you see, some cells create organic surfactants in your lungs. They help everything run smoothly. But what if you say, increased surface tension dramatically? Well, the surfactant normally counteracts the inward pressure on the alveoli. With it gone, the alveoli in the lungs would collapse on themselves. The lungs couldn't expand easily against this new force, and blood would rush to the dry areas of the lungs. The result, on the outside, it would appear as if they were drowning on land, with the most likely outcome being death. This power is actually horrific. Being able to blind anyone with their own tears, trapping others under the sea forever, and drowning even those on land. Let's watch him get blasted again. Ha! Again! Again! 1A! 1A! This was Baldr, your online friend. Okay, really quick, please like and subscribe. I wanted to put it in the video itself, but I was on a roll while writing the script, and it was too fluid for me to interrupt it in the middle. Thanks. Now for the actual end of the video portion. Here, I just wanted to mention that most of this video was just me putting on a good story. The science is all correct as far as I know, but just letting you know that you can make any power look overpowered if you give it this treatment. For example, water bending is even more overpowered if you tried using science, but it's not meant to be viewed through that lens. I felt I should say that. Also, I was listening to a lot of the Magnus archives while writing this, if you couldn't tell. Great show, but I think it affected the video outcome more than I expected, though that's fine. But now I'm trying to figure out what power my monster here would belong to. Probably the end? That would make sense. Also, a monster that can blind people with their own tears, that is so metal. I might save that for a D&D campaign or something. Though so few people are probably going to listen to this that you can feel free to use it too. And that should be it. Have a good one, alright? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Meh.